Hello everyone, my name is Lisa Springer and I am a Pilates instructor. Today I'll be going through the 5 key elements of Pilates. The first of which is breathing. So it seems simple enough, but I want you just to take a second and have a look at what happens to your body when you take a big deep breath in. So you might find that maybe your stomach comes out and then back in, maybe your shoulders and your chest lift up. And what we try to encourage in Pilates is that our chest actually expands to the side. So if you pop your hands on your lower ribs here, and you just let your fingertips touch slightly in the middle, when you take a deep breath in, we're aiming for your fingertips to come apart slightly, and then come back together. If you're struggling to get the feeling of that, you might want to grab maybe a hand towel. This is a piece of TheraBand. Maybe if you've got a heart rate monitor around your chest or a sports bra on, if you just wrap it slightly around the bottom of your chest here, not too tight, and then take a deep breath in, and we're aiming to push out to the side of it. It just gives you a bit of feedback when you're breathing to get that feeling. So it seems silly to practice this, but it does help to build the habit if you do this when you're lying down, if you're standing up, when you're doing an actual exercise, just to get your body used to that type of breathing. Okay, the second key element is called centering. So this is made up of 3 different components. The first is what we are doing with our spine. So if you come into the Pilates rest position, so hips and knees bent, we're lying flat on the mat, and I want you just to rock your pelvis forward and back. So you might find that you're pressing your spine down into the mat, and then you're making this big arch in your lower back here. And if you come just to rest in the middle of those 2 movements, you should find that you have this natural arch. Maybe you can fit your hand underneath your lower back. And I often speak about imagining you've got a little chocolate resting underneath your back that you don't want to squash. And in most of our Pilates exercises, we don't ever want to sort of squash that back into the mat. We're trying to keep that natural arch. So if we're doing something like an abdominal crunch, we are coming up and we're not crushing it like that. We're keeping that natural gap there. Maybe if we're lifting our legs or extending them like this, again, we're trying to keep that little hole in our back. There's 1 or 2 exercises when we're encouraged to maybe with something like shoulder bridge, we want to bring 1 vertebra at a time off the mat, but often that's prompted when you need to sort of squash your chocolate. The second part is which stomach muscles we are using when we're doing especially an abdominal exercise like that. So you might be familiar with the 6-pack muscles that run down the center of your tummy. But we're actually more interested in the muscles on the side of that. So if you feel where your hip bones are and you just move 2 or 3 centimeters in from there, you should be able to try and turn on these little muscles underneath. These are your internal obliques and your transverse abdominal muscles. And this is what we're aiming to use in Pilates. You might find that if an exercise is a bit too tricky, your tummy muscles start to dome in the middle. Those are the wrong muscles that we're using, so we always try to encourage, keep that stomach nice and flat. Maybe imagine that you're sucking your belly button in towards your spine so that we're not getting that doming of the muscles in the middle. The third part is what we're doing with our pelvic floor. So your pelvic floor is basically like a muscular net that runs between your pubic bone and your tailbone. And the best way to maybe imagine turning this on is either by holding in a wee, or maybe imagining an elevator lifting all the way up, initially to level 10, but then just drop it down to about a level 3, so it's a contraction that you can sustain for a while. If you're sitting down, maybe you could imagine it like you are trying to lift your pelvic floor off the seat. So the third key element is what happens to our ribs, especially when we're moving our arms. So again, if we're coming into our rest position, and then if we bring the hands overhead, initially to the ceiling, and then we start to lower them back, what you might find is naturally you'll want to arch the back and the ribs start to flare out to the side like this. So again, that's something that we want to avoid in Pilates. So a nice way to imagine it is if maybe you think about little springs between your hips and your lower ribs here. And when we're lifting up the arms, you don't want the springs to be stretched, so you're not letting this happen. You're not arching the back, ribs aren't flaring. You're just keeping this gentle contraction between these little springs here, and then when we lift up, this stays nice and flat. So that's the aim in Pilates. So we might prompt it as, make sure that your ribs are flat, no flaring of the ribs, don't arch the back too much. Okay, so the last two, the fourth key element, is what we are doing with our shoulder blades. So these are these things here known as your scapula or your wing bones on your back. And again, we're always trying to isolate the movement of those. So if we're in our rest position and we're lifting our hands towards the ceiling, we can try to imagine maybe we're holding a helium balloon in between our hands and letting everything else stay relaxed. We are just lifting our arms just a few centimeters towards the ceiling, feeling your shoulder blades coming apart, and then as you lower, let them sink into the mat. So it's just trying to isolate that movement and get the shoulder blades gliding. If you're not feeling that too well, you might want to then just pop over into our 4-point kneeling position. So our hands are underneath our shoulders, knees underneath our hips, and again in this position you're just letting the shoulder blades come together and then pull them apart. Come together and then pull them apart, just to try and get that isolation of the movement. And then the last key element is what we are doing with our head and our neck. So you might find maybe if you work an office job or if you sit at a desk for a long time in the day, we often end up with this sort of posture. So our chin pokes forward, we're all hunched over, our shoulders are quite lifted and straining. And some people maybe think, okay, well to correct, I'm just going to sit up like this. And in fact in Pilates we want something quite different. So we're actually trying to bring the chin into the chest, tuck it in a little bit. Not great for the double chin angle. And then we are trying to imagine, again, maybe our helium balloon is attached to the crown of our head, almost where your ponytail might be. And we are lifting up from the crown of our head. So again, we're not sort of sitting up like this. It's lifting with the chin tucked in. If you think about the head and neck position when you're doing a Pilates exercise, if we again are in our Pilates rest position, when we are maybe doing a crunch, a nice way I try to imagine it is if we have a ripe peach underneath our chin. So when you're coming up, you don't want to crush the peach, and you also don't want to sort of be looking in the wrong direction so that your peach falls away. You've just got a gentle amount of flexion in the neck, again, so that you're not completely pulling on the head and the neck when you're coming up. If you think about our head and neck when we're just lying on the mat like this, often some people find it quite uncomfortable and your head rolls back a bit, making a wide space between your chin and your chest. So here you might find it helpful to maybe fold your mat over a few times underneath your head, or maybe grabbing a small pillow or a towel, fold it over a few times just to make it a bit more comfortable when you're lying down. Perfect, so those are the 5 key elements. They might sound familiar to you if you've done a few Pilates classes, but if not, just try and keep them in the back of your mind. It just helps when you are doing a class to try and do the exercise correctly. Just let me know if you have any questions. I'd love to help you out more. Otherwise, I look forward to seeing you again soon.